course, here is the range of the orca in Antarctica. Now, the next animal I'm going to show you is one of my favourite animals and also probably the voice of the wilderness. It is the wolf. To be precise, the Arctic wolf. Arctic wolves, as you guessed, live in the Arctic, and they are slightly smaller than grey wolves, but with like longer muzzle and shorter ears, but also instead of a grey pelt of fur, they have white fur, and that's meant. But it's also a lot thicker in those wolves because where they live in the Arctic, it can be very, very cold. In fact, I'm not even joking when I say that temperatures in the Arctic, especially in winter, can drop to lower than minus 70 degrees. Of course, in the Arctic, wolves tend to live in quite small communities with about only 12 to 15 of them, so they quite often have to hunt on their own. And their lives are very, very difficult out there. I mean, most wolves don't live to more than 7 to 10 years, and about 75% of their pups die before they're only a year old. And that's mainly down to the fact that food can be scarce out there, but also a lot of what they feed on are things like caribou and musk oxen. And caribou they tend to migrate, and they make the longest land migration of any animal. And they only appear for a few weeks in the wolves' territory, so they have to make best of the opportunity they have to catch a caribou, because they are a big prize, especially for a pack with pups that need feeding. But also things like musk oxen. Now, musk oxen are formidable animals. They're probably the most dangerous prey wolves take down, because musk oxen are big, they're powerful, they have incredibly bad tempers, and they're built like tanks. And of course they've been around on the planet during the ice ages, so they evolved around not just wolves but also the woolly mammoth and saber-toothed cats. But of course, as you can see, they have very thick skulls with lethal horns. I mean, they could snap a wolf's spine in a flat-out charge, or they could gore a wolf with their horns. But of course, although they are dangerous to take down, wolves, quite often they have no choice, and it's quite often calves or elderly ones that they take down. It's like with caribou, when wolves are hunting caribou, if they usually target the old, the weak and sick and young, and while it's a gruesome end for them, it actually ensures that the rest of their prey's herd remains strong. By taking out the weaker members, they ensure that their prey can remain strong. And of course, there's actually an island in the Canadian Arctic called Ellesmere Island, and incredibly, the wolves there have got no fear of man. That's mainly because the wolves there, many of them have never seen a human being before, and they've never been hunted, so they have no fear of humans. And they've actually been studied there to see how wolves evolved into the domestic dogs that we have today. And it shows that they did become man's best friend through their inquisitive nature and trust. And of course, in many other parts of the world, wolves are shy and elusive and avoid humans, and that's mainly down to decades of persecution by man. But of course, one of the reasons for that is because wolves have featured heavily in human myths and folklore as the bad guys. In many stories, wolves play the villains, which I think is incredibly unfair because they are not savage, dangerous animals that deliberately want to kill us. I mean, they're more just like inquisitive and very curious animals, but decades of persecution have driven many wolves to avoid humans. And another thing that's always amazes me about wolves is their sense of smell. Like polar bears, wolves have probably the sense of smell that's probably 8,000 times more powerful than a human being's. And that's actually one way they hunt when they're tracking prey. By picking up the scent of it, they can determine whether the animal's young, old, weak, sick, or injured. And they are very sociable animals. And of course, the way they bring themselves together as a pack, particularly before a hunt, is by using a howl. And it's said that the howl of a wolf can be heard from over 6 miles away. It works as a way to rally the pack together, but also serves as a warning to rival wolves to keep their distance. It's basically the wolf version of sending an email or a text. The Arctic wolves are not endangered or vulnerable. In fact, there are still hundreds, if not thousands of them in the Arctic Circle, but people rarely see them because they're very shy and elusive, but also they're mostly nocturnal, which means they're active at night, and they have widely extended territories because, as I mentioned earlier, life in the Arctic is hard for them, and they have to scan everywhere in search of food. And of course, with the animals they hunt, like musk oxen and caribou, I'll get to them later. But this here is their range. And that right there is Ellesmere Island. It's a place where the wolves there have no fear of man. And now, I'm going to show you one of the most famous animals of the polar regions. It is the emperor penguin. Now, penguins are probably some of the most beloved of all creatures. In fact, emperor penguins, they can probably stand no taller than me, probably only about up to my hip. But they are without doubt some of the toughest creatures in Antarctica. As you can see, they don't fly, but while they don't fly in the air, they can sort of fly underwater, because that's where they evolved to fly. And they can dive to incredible depths, of like possibly over 500 meters deep in search of food, and they mainly feed on things like krill, as well as fish and squid, and of course they can probably eat more than their own body weight in food. And a lot of the time the males do that because of when it's breeding season, because penguins mate for life, and when the female lays the egg, she hands it over to the male, who has to quickly get the egg onto his feet, and then he tucks the egg into a pouch underneath his stomach, and then as the females go off to sea to feed, it's the male's jobs to look after the eggs. And of course, when the sun goes down in autumn in Antarctica, it doesn't rise for 5 or 6 months. So temperatures plummet, and there's freezing gales and gale force winds. And how the penguins actually survive is mainly by huddling together, like tucking their beaks into a group and all taking it in turns to have their backs to the gales. to conserve their body heat, but also they survive on the fat reserves they built up while feeding before the winter. Of course, their eggs don't hatch for months at a time, and they can just stand with their backs to the wind for months without eating. And then around March time, when spring comes, the sun finally rises, and the male emperors, a lot of them do survive the darkest and coldest winters on the planet, and probably lose about 50 to 60% of their body weight, but it's all worth it when the eggs finally hatch, because once their eggs hatch, the males will look after the females, will look after the eggs until the females return, and of course, unfortunately, a lot of the females don't make it back to their nests, because there's predators out there like killer whales, leopard seals, and a lot of them fall prey to those. But of course, penguins aren't endangered at all. I mean, they are. Some of them are considered vulnerable, but of course, one of the main reasons for that is global warming. Like with the temperatures of the planet rising, it's melting the ice more and more, so it's making it very hard for them to get out to sea, but also to feed. I mean, as I mentioned with the polar bears, one way you can stop this is by finding more ways to, like, eco-friendly things to prevent global warming, but of course I don't have all the answers to that. And here is the range of the emperor penguins. And now I'm going to show you all a comparison of the different penguin species. As you can see, there are many different kinds of penguins throughout the world. Of course, you've got the emperor penguin, Adelie penguins, the chin strap penguins, I think they're called that because the markings underneath their beaks looks like the strap on a helmet. Also, king penguins, which are a cousin of the emperor penguin, the gentee penguin that I've mentioned earlier, and then there's northern rockhoppers, macaroni penguins, not actually named after pasta as I thought when I was a kid. They're actually named after a colourful 18th century hat. And then there's also royal penguin and southern rockhoppers. And then in South America, you've got the Magellanic penguin, the humpback penguin, which is very common in zoos, and the Galapagos penguin. But you also get penguins in Africa. And then in Australia and New Zealand, you've got little penguin, yellow-eyed penguin, Fiordland penguin, Snares penguin, and erect crested penguin. And you'll probably notice that I, unlike my fourth favourite British actor, Benedict Cumberbatch, can actually say penguin, because there's this big joke going around that when Benedict Cumberbatch narrated the South Pacific documentary, he actually said penguin wrong. He called them penguins. And it's been a massive joke on social media ever since. But yeah, these are the penguins of the world. And the next animal I'm going to show you is probably the most well-defended animal of the Arctic Circle, but also one of its most dangerous, and one that I did mention earlier. It is the musk oxen. Musk oxen are bovids or bovines, which means they're in the cow family. And if your idea of a cow is a slow-moving, dopey, friendly the freeloader chewing the cud, you couldn't be more wrong, as